Mayong gabi sa inyong tanan. It's the 14th of October and it's a rainy night for us here in Cagayan de Oro City. I'm welcoming you tonight for our 7th North Central Mindanao chapter of the Philippine Pediatric Society webinar. This is our 7th of the year and it's going to be an exciting night because we have an excellent speaker. But before we start with our lecture, let's have our invocation followed by the national anthem and the PPS hymn.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Good evening once again. You all know that we cannot start today's activity or tonight's activity without the opening remarks of our dear President, Dr. Amelita Maria Baby Hamoy.
Hi, good evening. Reg, it's also raining here in Iligan. I hope everyone's fine and keeping safe. Last webinar, Dr. Raisa Obayawa had us stretch our tired and weary bodies. That was relaxing, wasn't it? Okay, tonight, we'll focus our responsibility and promise of keeping the Filipino child healthy. This pandemic changed every aspect of their lives. With all the stress they are experiencing, we need to keep them healthy mentally, emotionally, and physically. Children nowadays have a wide variety of food choices, but sadly, these choices may not be healthy to eat. Giving them the pinggang Pinoy is easier said than done. Most mothers out there may agree with me, especially when ordering fast foods. They are just a fingertips away. The discussion tonight might help us get through in helping our patients and children have their proper diet to keep them healthy. Before I end this talk, as some of you may have known, we have colleagues who have been afflicted, lost their loved ones due to COVID-19. May I request everyone for a minute of silence to offer prayers for them and their families. Amen. Thank you. May we have a fruitful night ahead of us. Amping mong tanan.
Thank you, Dr. Hamoy. So let me read to you now our house rules. No house rules, I suppose, PJ. So tonight's speaker is not a stranger to the chapter. He is very well known as a good dancer, eloquent speaker. That's why he is here with us tonight. And you can see from his CV, it's so colorful. He was actually the most handsome resident and fellow at the Philippine Children's Medical Center where he had his fellowship in neonatology. And now he's not so junior consultant of the one of the biggest hospitals here in Cagayan de Oro City, which is Madonna and Child Hospital, where he holds his clinic. He was also the past president of our chapter in 19 Kopong. You hit the year, right, Dennis? So everybody knows him. He's going to talk on nutritional supplementation in children and adolescents. So let's give the night to our speaker, Dr. Dennis James Absin.
I like the most handsome part, but that's not true. I don't like the not so junior. But anyway, good evening to everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity also to greet a happy birthday to our dear Vice President of the chapter, Dr. Therese Habay. Today is October 14th, the 14th of October. It's her birthday. And since we're not able to be eating food together, so we're just going to be talking about food together, since our topic for tonight is about nutritional supplementation. So to start off, let me share my, okay, my slides. Here they are. I'm sorry, I'll have to go back to the first slide. Okay, so am I good? Can you hear me? And can you see my slides? I hope so. So anyway, yes, the topic for tonight is, it's actually a review on nutritional supplementation in children and adolescents. So you might be wondering, what's my business talking about nutritional supplementation when I'm not a nutritionist or a dietitian or a gastroenterologist? After all, I'm just a boy standing in front of a girl asking her to love him. That's the line from Notting Hill, the dialogue of Julia Roberts to Hugh Grant. But anyway, I'm just going to be talking about nutrition from a pediatrician to another. Okay, we're just going to go through whatever the controversies are, whatever the level of information and knowledge we have about nutritional supplementation. Okay, so disclosure, I am not going to be paid for this, at least from the industry. And at the end of this lecture, we're going to, or this lecture, with this lecture rather, we're going to look into the state of nutrition of Filipino children and the requirements to maintain good health. And we're going to review the current recommendations to address deficiency states. For the scope of this particular talk, we're not going to be talking about macronutrient states and deficiency, particularly about protein and energy states, or the state of protein, energy, malnutrition, or sufficiency among Filipino children. So we're going to talk about micronutrients. And it's not going to be all of the micronutrients, it's going to be just some of them. Okay, so just so that we're on the same page, we have to define what is meant by health. And the WHO has the following definition. It's a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not just the absence of sickness or frailty. And the determinants of health, we have biology and genetics, which refers to a patient's or a person's age or sex, individual behavior, if a person is exposed to smoking, to alcohol use, to drug use, to unprotected sex, to physical environment, where the person lives, or is he living in an overcrowded environment, health services, which is basically a problem in the Philippines because this refers to access to quality healthcare, and social environment, which refers to a person's economic position, his level of income. More specifically, good health is determined by the following: balanced nutrition, absence of disease, physical activity, and optimal environmental conditions. So for tonight, we are going to be talking about this particular determinant of good health, which is balanced nutrition. Okay, so let's take a review on the recommendations on vitamin and nutrient intake as stated by the American Academy of Pediatrics and the National Institute of Health. We have here vitamin A, which we need for growth, for healthy skin, tissue repair, night and color vision, and to our right would be the foods where we can get vitamin A from. Then we have the B vitamins, which are needed for promotion of RBC formation and metabolism. And to your right again would be the foods that we can get the B vitamins from. Then we have vitamin C, which is needed for strengthening of connective tissue, muscle, and skin, and for increasing wound and bone healing. So we get it also from the following foods to your right. And we have vitamin D, which is needed for tooth and bone formation, for calcium absorption, and enhancement of nearly all the cells in the immune system. That's why we're hearing about the recommendations in this time of the pandemic of COVID-19, when when we're being told that you have to take vitamin D for you to boost your immune system because it can help. So there is a basis for that because it enhances our immune system. Then we have iron, which is needed for production of blood, for building of muscles, and we get it from beef, turkey, etc. And calcium also, which is for healthy bone development, primarily from milk and dairy products. We also have folate, which is needed for cell division and for prevention of neural tube defects. That's very, very important. I just received a baby this morning rather, with encephalocele. These neural tube defects can actually be prevented by intake of folate or folic acid once a woman enters the reproductive age. And zinc, which supports growth and which is important also for taste and smell and assists as well in immune function. So aside from vitamin D, we say that in this particular pandemic, we have to take zinc and we have to get lots of vitamin D for us to boost our immune system. So these are the vitamin and nutrient intake recommendations from AAP. Not all, but some of them. Okay, so that begs the question. So are the nutrient intakes and food sources of Filipino infants, toddlers, and young children adequate? Are our children, the Filipino children, considering that most or majority of Filipinos belong to the lower economic stratum, are their dietary intake adequate? Sadly, expectedly, and obviously, the answer to that would be no. Okay, so let's now take a look at specific data on how deficient the Filipino diet or the state of deficiency of nutrition among Filipino children. So we have here data published in 2018 from the journal Nutrients, and it tackles Filipino children's nutritional state under 5 years of age. And we have to, if you look into this particular study, it covers not just, we are presuming that, yeah, Filipino children are malnourished, undernourished because they're poor. But this particular study included, the demographics included children from the lower economic stratum up to the super rich, okay? So malnutrition deficiency states covers all the economic spectrum in the Philippines. So there's also the study showed that intake of total fat as a percentage of energy and of most micronutrients were highly inadequate. So we're talking here about macro and micronutrients. And the prevalence of inadequate nutrient intakes, which is defined as the percent of children with intakes less than the estimated average requirements. Okay, when we say EAR, that's the estimated average requirement. That's what we are aiming for. If you reach that point, then we are adequate. We are sufficient in terms of our nutritional intake, and particularly for children. So the level of EAR, or rather the percentage of Filipino children that does not reach the EAR for micronutrients would be around 60 to 90% for iron, calcium, vitamin C, and zinc. That means almost 9 out of 10 children less than 5 years of age would not meet the estimated average requirement for these particular micronutrients. And in terms of vitamin A, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, vitamin B6, and phosphorus, roughly 30 to 50% of children less than 5 years of age do not reach or does not meet the estimated average requirement. So that's a rather sad statistic for Filipino children. They are not getting enough. They are not eating well. They're not getting the necessary micronutrients for good health. So it looked into the reasons why that is so. So they found out that the diets of Filipino children were composed of limited foods, namely a large amount of refined rice and other low nutrient dense foods, such as cookies and sugar. If you notice, a lot of parents or clinics complaining of their children being picky eaters, not eating well, just wanting to eat junk foods, sweetened beverages. And that is the reality in the Philippines. While vegetables, fruits, meats, and eggs made little contribution to daily energy of nutrients. Okay, so the point is, the diet of Filipino children is particularly deficient of micronutrients. Okay, so we look into the concept of minimum acceptable diet. So this refers to the proportion of children for this particular age group from 6 months up to 2 years, meeting both the minimum dietary diversity and the minimum meal frequency to ensure both dietary and nutrient adequacy. So we are talking here about two things: dietary diversity and meal frequency. So how do we define dietary diversity? And do Filipino children meet that requirement for dietary diversity? Okay, so when we talk about minimum dietary diversity, it just refers to the proportion of children who receive foods from 4 or more from 7 food groups. So we have here listed: number 1, grains, roots, and sugars; number 2, dairy products; 3, legumes and nuts; 4, flesh meat; 5, eggs; 6, vitamin A rich fruits and vegetables; and number 7, other fruits and vegetables. So when we say a child has diverse diet, a good dietary diversity, that means he is getting 4 or more from the 7 food groups. So if we look into that, how are Filipino children, what is the state of dietary diversity among Filipino children? So we have here, this is actually data from DOST and the FNRI, or the Food and Nutritional Research Institute, which is the arm of DOST. So we have here the trends in the proportion of Filipino children from 6 months up to less than 2 years meeting the minimum dietary diversity. Okay, again, dietary diversity is 4 or more out of the 7 food groups. In 2011, the level or the percentage of children who have adequate dietary diversity was pegged at 21.6%, went down 2 years later to 15.5%, doubled almost after 2 years to 29%, and went down again 2 years ago, that's in 2018, to 23%. Okay, that means majority of Filipino children do not have or do not meet the minimum dietary diversity and therefore are prone to micronutrient deficiency. Okay, so how do we address that? Offering a lot of foods, diverse kinds of food to get enough micronutrients. As what Baby mentioned earlier, we look back or we use the advocacy or the recommendation of the Department of Health on Pinggang Pinoy. Okay, so Pinggang Pinoy actually offers a diverse kind of food that would meet the dietary requirement for Filipinos in terms of macro and micronutrient requirements. Okay, so if the Pinggang Pinoy, I'm sure everyone has heard about it and has read about it. So it's just a food guide using a food plate model to show the recommended proportion by food group in every meal. So we have here the catchphrases: go, grow, and glow. So a particular meal should have the go component, which is energy-dense foods such as rice or carbohydrates; the grow component, which refers to protein, which is for bodybuilding, muscle buildup; and for glow, which is for body regulating, which refers to the intake of vitamins and minerals rather, in the diet. Okay, so the Pinggang Pinoy has recommendations for different age groups. For this particular picture on your slide, on your screen, this is for the 3 to 12 years old group of children. So aside from the go, grow, and glow, they also have recommendations for what particular kinds of food which are available in the Philippines would meet the requirements to provide sufficient macro and micronutrients. Okay, so you can see on your screen the sample one-day meal plan, which provides for common foods which a child can take for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, and for snacks. Okay, so this also holds true. They also have recommendations for other age groups, in particular for teens for 13 to 18 years of age. We have here the food plan, the meal plan, and you can access this on the web. This is actually just taken from the web. So if you want to recommend these to your patients, you could just give them a copy for this. And this is not just limited to children. We also have Pinggang Pinoy recommendations for adults. Okay, So basically, these are really good recommendations. They should be able to provide the micro and macronutrients that the Filipino child would need growing up. However, this is not the case. I mean, this is not the reality. We have recommendations, but on the ground, children are not getting enough. Children are picky, whether they're poor, whether they're rich. The poor, they don't have access to good quality foods. They don't have access to diverse kinds of foods. For the rich, a lot of children, are so picky that they just drink milk or just want sweetened beverages. So there is really a problem. We know that macro and micronutrients can be provided solely by the diet. Okay, solely by balanced nutrition, we can make in terms of nutrition. Food can provide the necessary requirements or the necessary nutrients to make our children healthy. But the reality is not a lot of children are eating right. Okay. So let's take a look at the AAP again and the National Institute of Health recommendations on vitamin and nutrient intake. So there are time points in the development of a child where intake is most important. So number one, vitamin D supplementation for all kids, unless they're drinking more than 32 ounces of milk or formula. For zinc and iron between 6 to 9 months, calcium intake during puberty, iron for menstruating females, and folate for post-menarchal females who could become pregnant. There are also special circumstances when the recommendations would be, there are rather special circumstances that the recommendations mention. So those who are on vegan diets are at highest risk for iron, zinc, and B12 deficiencies. So therefore, supplements are important in these populations. So plant sources of iron are less bioavailable than that found in meat. And those who do not consume dairy or fortified plant-based milks are at risk for calcium and vitamin D deficiency. Okay, so if a child is not eating well, if a child is not getting enough micronutrients, do we need to supplement? Do we need to give this particular micronutrients such as vitamins for them to be able to meet the estimated average requirement or the EAR? Now, the Philippines does not have recommendation for that, but we are going to look into the AAP. It does not recommend nutritional supplementation in healthy children over the age of 1 year. Why? Because primarily it has to be, they are always emphasizing the importance of food intake that would meet the requirements for macro and micronutrients. However, in a lot of cases in children, they are not getting enough. So supplementation may be recommended by pediatricians if in the following situations. If a child is underweight, is a picky eater, is on a restricted or special diet, for example, a vegan diet, or has a medical condition that may increase the risk of nutritional deficiencies. For example, a child on a dairy-free diet may require calcium supplementation, and a child on a vegan diet may require an iron supplementation. Okay, so we have to emphasize it has to come from food, but there are going to be situations when food is not available, when food is not being taken by the child. So we may not need to supplement this particular micronutrients. Okay, so now let's take a look on the specific micronutrients, and we have first on the line would be vitamin A. So let's focus on vitamin A. Okay, so we have here on the table a comparison of prevalence of vitamin A deficiency by age and physiological state in the Philippines. These are the years 1993 and 1998. So from 6 months to 5 years, we are the one highlighted in red. So the total in 1993 was 35.3% prevalence of vitamin A deficiency, and 1998 was around 38%. Fast forward to more recent times, in the 8th National Nutrition Survey of the Food and Nutrition Research Institute showed vitamin A deficiency remains a persistent public health issue in the Philippines. The latest data would prove this, such that in 2008, 15.2% of children ages 6 months to 5 years had 15.2% of them rather have vitamin A deficiency, and this jumped to 20.4% in 2013. So it's still a significant problem. Notice that 2013, there is a 20.4% deficiency. And that should lead us to the recommendation of World Health Organization when they say that in an area, in a setting where the prevalence of vitamin A deficiency is 20% or higher, such as in the Philippines, then we have to supplement with vitamin A. Or if the incidence or prevalence of night blindness is 1% or higher, there has been a study looking into children and the incidence of nyctalopia or night blindness. There were 3 areas studied. These were one in Quezon, in Luzon, Samar in Visayas, and Zamboanga in Mindanao. And the data and the results showed that 1.1 up to 4.4% per night had night blindness or nyctalopia. So again, this reinforces the need for Filipino children to be supplemented with vitamin A. And that's why you will notice that this particular recommendation for infants 6 to 11 months of age, we give 100,000 international units. That's why it's incorporated when children visit the health center to get their measles vaccine. They're also given patak vitamin A, which is actually the recommendation for WHO to supplement and correct the deficiency state in Filipino children. Okay, let's move on to vitamin D. I've been trying to gather data or look into data to establish deficiency states or the state of vitamin D deficiency or being sufficient among Filipino children, but there's no data available, most likely because vitamin D primarily is taken or we get it from sunlight, and in the Philippines, there's no problem with the sunlight. We have it all throughout the year, okay? But just the same, I'm going to talk about vitamin D because very importantly, it's been recommended right now during the pandemic that it's helpful in fighting off COVID-19. So we have here on your screens the recommendation or the dietary allowances for vitamin D. But primarily, we get vitamin D from sunlight. So let's take a look at some information, interesting information about vitamin D and sunlight. Okay, so the amount of vitamin D you get from exposing your bare skin to the sun, it depends on a lot of factors. So it depends on the time of day. Skin produces more vitamin D if exposed during the middle of the day. And it's being said that the best time to get your vitamin D would be from 10 in the morning up to 3 in the afternoon. Now, this is rather interesting because, you know, Filipinos are so afraid of sunlight. We are afraid of sunlight. People, when they go out being exposed to the sun, they use umbrellas, they put on sunblocks, they take in glutathione, whitening products, you know, so everyone is just so afraid of the sun. So that should predispose the Filipino population to vitamin D deficiency. Okay, so we have to. I always tell my patients, the mothers of my patients, you expose your child to sunlight. You also go. You expose yourself to sunlight to get enough vitamin D. It has its benefits. It will boost your immune system. It also is dependent on where you live. So the closer you are to the equator, the easier it is to produce vitamin D from sunlight all year round. So the Philippines is near the equator, so we don't have any problem with getting enough sunlight for the production of vitamin D3. It also is dependent on the color of your skin. So pale skins easily make more vitamin D than darker skinned individuals. And the amount of skin we expose. So the more skin exposed, the more vitamin D the body will produce. Additionally, it also is going to be dependent on how old we are. So if we get older, it's going to be more difficult for us to get vitamin D from sunlight. And whether we're wearing sunscreen, because sunscreen blocks a lot of vitamin D production, and the altitude we're at. So the sun is more intense on top of the mountain than at the beach. So that means theoretically people in Bukidnon are going to be can more easily produce vitamin D compared to people such as, for example, in Cagayan de Oro. And whether it is cloudy, because less UVB, it's the UVB ray from the sun which is responsible for production of vitamin D3. The UVA is the one responsible for aging of the skin. UVB is the one responsible for development of skin cancer. The sun's rays has more UVA than UVB. Okay, it's 500 times more UVA than UVB. But for vitamin D, it's UVB. Okay, so when it's cloudy, there's going to be less UVB that's going to reach our skin, and therefore we are not going to produce that much vitamin D. Air pollution, which is a common problem in most cities, major cities in the Philippines. So polluted air soaks up UVB or reflects it back into space. So if you live somewhere where there's lots of pollution, your skin would make less vitamin D. And if you are lastly being behind glass. So sometimes I'll just stay here indoors. Anyway, there's a glass and sunlight can still shine through the glass. But glass blocks all UVB. So skin can make vitamin D if you're in sunlight but behind glass. Okay? So when you expose yourself, go outside and have your production of vitamin D. Okay, the question is, how long are you going to stay in the sunlight? We are going to answer that later. Okay, so here, the best recommendation is to get half the sun exposure it takes for your skin to begin to burn. So you go expose yourself to sunlight between 10 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. If after 20 minutes, your skin would start to burn, that means half of that's 10 minutes, would be enough for you to get your adequate dose of vitamin D. Okay, so as I've said, vitamin D has been in the forefront recently because of its postulated use in cases of COVID-19 infection. So there are good reasons actually why this is being postulated. And both in the early viremic and later hyperinflammatory phases of COVID-19. So vitamin D metabolites actually would support innate antiviral effector mechanisms, including induction of antimicrobial peptides and autophagy. Okay. Additionally, one study had screened for antiviral activity, and the report was there was an inhibitory effect of the active vitamin D metabolite in human nasal epithelial cells infected with SARS-CoV-2 or the COVID-19 virus or infection. This was published in the Lancet last August 2020. Okay, vitamin D was shown to regulate immunopathological inflammatory responses in the context of other respiratory infections. We know that in severe cases of COVID-19, you have your overactivation of your inflammatory mechanisms. You have your cytokine and bradykinin storms. So vitamin D actually is an immunomodulator. Although the standard for care for treatment of these hyperactive inflammatory processes in COVID-19 would still be dexamethasone. But there is a role of vitamin D for immunomodulation to prevent this. They're looking into that actually. There's no conclusive evidence as of this time yet on the effect of vitamin D supplementation in severe forms of COVID-19. Okay, there's nothing here. Okay, then now let's go to calcium. So what is the state of calcium deficiency in the Philippines? The intake of calcium among age groups, regardless of age group, whether young or old, is steadily declining. So in the journal, the Philippine Journal of Science, published in 2016, it reported that only 11.5% of the total households surveyed in 2008 met 80% of the recommended energy and nutrient intake for calcium, okay? And roughly over 70% of Filipinos across population groups are deficient in calcium in their daily diet. Okay, so we are a nation of calcium deficient people. So most likely our bones are very, very so weak. Okay, so again, this is from the same journal. They looked into the intake of calcium among children from ages 6 months up to 10 years. And we've discussed earlier about EAR, or the estimated average requirement for a particular nutrient. So the study showed that only 14.8% of children from 6 months to almost 12 years or almost 11 years of age would meet the estimated average requirement. So more than 80% do not actually meet. So we have a significant deficiency of calcium among Filipino children. Notice that the highest percentage among age groups who meet the EAR would be those 6 to 11 months, okay? Because for this particular age group, they are more still dependent on milk feedings. And we know that the primarily calcium is the best source would still be milk feedings. But this emphasizes or showcases the deficiency among Filipino children in terms of the calcium as a micronutrient. So the Philippine Dietary Reference Intakes recommended the following doses of calcium to be taken from the diet. So it increases once from 6 months up to 12 years. So from 6 to 12 months is 400 milligrams. And for 10 to 12 years of age children belonging to that age group, it's roughly around 1,000 milligrams of calcium should be taken daily. So let's take a look at some of the foods, common foods that you get calcium from. So the best source would still be milk. Around 240 mils of milk should provide 300 milligrams. That's just 1 cup of milk should provide 300 milligrams of calcium. You also have here white beans, broccoli, cheddar cheese, yogurt, and other foods. So basically, we can get calcium from foods. However, as we've said, the data does not support that Filipino children are getting enough calcium from the diet. Okay, so the nutritional guidelines for Filipinos recommend consuming 4 tablespoons of powdered milk or 1 glass of liquid milk of 240 mils, milk products, and other calcium-rich foods for strong bones. And this is the recommendation by the FNRI of the Department of Science and Technology. Now we focus on zinc. As we've said, zinc has been recommended right now for COVID-19 because it also boosts the immune system. So globally, recent estimates, this was published by the WHO in 2013, not recently because it's been 7 years. Over a quarter of children under 5 years of age are stunted, and this has something to do with zinc deficiency as well, and consequently are at an increased risk of dying and other adverse consequences throughout life. So zinc is known to play a critical role in biological processes, including cell growth, differentiation, and metabolism. So that deficiency in this micronutrient restricts childhood growth and decreases resistance to infections, which contributes significantly to morbidity and mortality in young children. In the Philippines, what is the state of zinc deficiency? So it is also prevalent in 25.6, so roughly a quarter of the Philippine population are zinc deficient. So we have our different age groups, and the most or the highest percentage of people in a particular age group would be the ones belonging to those who are more than 60 years of age. So around 36% of them are calcium deficient. Okay, so our senior citizens. And in adolescents, that's still 23.6% are deficient, and school children are 21.6% deficient. So that's a significant proportion of the population, of our children's population, who are deficient in zinc. And with moderate zinc deficiency, you will experience growth retardation and male hypogonadism in adolescents, rough skin, poor appetite, mental lethargy, delayed wound healing, cell-mediated immune dysfunctions, and abnormal neurosensory changes. So this data was published just a year ago in the Frontiers in Nutrition and showed the data or the state of zinc deficiency among different age groups in the Philippines. Okay, so we have to supplement zinc because regular dietary zinc intake is required because it cannot be produced or stored in our bodies. In 2011, around 116,000 deaths in children under 5 years were because of zinc deficiency. So that accounts around 1.7% of mortalities in this particular age group. So that is a significant proportion of deaths because of the deficiency of this particular micronutrient. So we have here recommendations for normal zinc consumption among children. It ranges from 2 to 11 per day, depending on age and diet. This was from the WHO and the Food Organization. The World Health Organization recommends for cases of diarrhea, 20 milligrams of zinc for 10 to 14 days. Some studies would recommend around a dose of 10 milligrams per day of zinc for 6 months to reduce stunting. And in another study, it's 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams per day. Okay, however, there are no standard recommendations for dose, frequency, and duration of preventive zinc supplementation. So if you go through the data, it ranges from 2 to 11 to 2 to 11 milligrams per day for the zinc supplementation to prevent the adverse effects of zinc deficiency. Okay, so as I've said earlier, zinc has been in the forefront right now because of its role, apparent role in COVID-19, in the pandemic, because it boosts the immune system. So what is the basis for saying that? So we have here zinc and immunity. So zinc affects multiple aspects of the immune system. So it is crucial for normal development and function of cells, mediating innate immunity, neutrophilic function, and natural killer cells. Macrophages also are affected by zinc deficiency. Phagocytosis, intracellular killing, and cytokine production all are affected by zinc deficiency. And zinc deficiency adversely affects the growth and function of T and B cells, which are very important in mounting an immune response in fighting viral and bacterial infections. The ability of zinc to function as an antioxidant and stabilize membranes suggests that it has a role in the prevention of free radical-induced injury during inflammatory processes. And in COVID-19, we know there is a hyperactivation, overactivation of the inflammatory processes leading to multi-organ dysfunction. So these are actually the basis for saying that zinc has a role in COVID-19 because it boosts the immune system. It is not a cure, okay? It's just a, how do you call it? A supplemental recommendation. I mean, you know, it's not a cure, but it helps. It helps. Okay, so next we have the next micronutrient. We have here iron. So approximately 300 million children globally had anemia in 2011. And deficiency in iron is thought to be the most common cause of anemia. So iron deficiency can result from inadequate intake or absorption of dietary iron, increased need in periods of growth, increased losses from menstruation, infection by intestinal helminths, which is rather common here in the Philippines, presence of schistomiasis or hookworm infestation in areas endemic to these parasites. Okay. So let's look at the prevalence of anemia among Filipino children less than 2 years old by age groups. So we have here data taken from 2013 and 2 years ago from 2018, published or taken from the FNRI of the DOST. Okay, so the one in red brown color is 2013 and 2018 would be the pink bars. Okay, so the latest figures we have in 2018, okay, for 6 to 11 months, prevalence of anemia is 48.2%. That's a significant number, a proportion of our children belonging to less than 1 year of age. And for 12 to 23 months, it's 35.4% who are anemic. That is also very, very significant. That's why we are not achieving our potential as a nation, because our children are so malnourished, are so deficient, not just with macro, but also with micronutrients. So let's take a look at the other age groups. Okay, for 2018, the one in green, okay, for 2 years old, the prevalence is 13.4% of these children are anemic. 3 years old, 6.4, 4 years old, 7.1, and 5 years old, 4.2% of them are anemic. For older children up to 10 years of age, so 6 years old, 23.5% prevalence of anemia. 7 years old, it's 16.9% of children belonging to this age group. 8 years old, 14.5, and 9 to 10 years old of age, 12.4% of children are anemic. So these are the latest data taken from the FNRI in the year 2018, which is just 2 years ago. So because of that, we try to, how do you say it? Take the reality of deficiency and the recommendations of WHO. If we take a look at our infants with over 40% prevalence of anemia in this particular age group, now the WHO recommends that in this particular setting where supplementation of iron is needed, this is recommended in the setting where the prevalence of anemia in infants and young children is 40% or higher. If we take a look at our data, it's this particular age group, 6 to 11 months, 48.2 in 2018. So we need to give supplementation of iron to our children because of the prevalence of anemia. Okay, so the recommended supplement composition would be around 10 to 12 milligrams elemental iron. It's given daily, and it's given for 3 consecutive months in a year. Okay, for purposes of definition, the WHO recommend, or rather defines anemia in children as those having hematocrit levels of less than 11. Okay, so when we say prevalence of anemia based on WHO data, that means the percentage of children having hemoglobin levels of less than 11. Okay, so this is the particular supplementation of iron that is recommended for infants and children less than 2 years of age. For preschool children, 24 to 59 months of age, it's 30 milligrams elemental iron given daily for 3 consecutive months in a year. But in our data, in the prevalence data of anemia in the Philippines, this particular age group has a lower incidence or prevalence of anemia, and it's less than 40%. Okay, so you may have to take it on a case-to-case basis. So if you have a patient who is anemic, then you can give iron supplementation for 3 months. For school-age children, 5 to 12 years of age, it's given 30 to 60 milligrams elemental iron daily for 3 consecutive months in a year as well. Okay, so we're done with the micronutrients. So here are just some interesting things to know about dietary supplements in children and teens, because the title of my talk is actually Nutritional Supplementation of Children and Adolescents. So we'll talk a little about teens. Okay, so number 1, although many dietary supplements come from natural sources, as we say, they're natural, they're organic, it does not necessarily mean they are safe. So you have to check the label. You have to research what are the how do you say this? I forgot. Anyway, some mothers who come to your clinic and ask about green products, okay? They're giving their children this particular products. You have a lot of companies promoting natural ingredients, organic supplements. So always check whether they are safe, okay? More likely than not, a lot of products in the Philippines which are touted as safe, when you check the web, when you check the internet, you find something that may be negative. You find data that it may be harmful, and these data are coming from other countries. So in the Philippines, we have poor regulatory bodies. Our supplements are not being regulated. They are not being checked. So we do not know whether they're safe or not. Number 2, federal regulations. We say federal because this is actually taken from the US. So this was reported, and this was actually presented by the National Center for Complementary Integrative Health under the US Department of Health and Human Services. This was published in 2018. So federal regulations in the US, at least in the Philippines, we don't have that, are less strict than those for prescription and over-the-counter drugs. So you really cannot validate or verify the safety because regulatory requirements for approval are not that strict. Dietary and herbal supplements may be of poor quality and contain contaminants, including drugs, chemicals, or metals. And studies of dietary supplements have found significant differences between what's on the label and what's in the bottle of some supplements. So dietary supplements may interact with other products or medications or have unwanted side effects on their own. About 4,600 children, number 5, go to the emergency room every year in the US because of dietary supplements. And most took a vitamin or mineral when unsupervised because child-resistant packaging isn't required for dietary supplements. So these ER visits were because of overdosage or unprescribed intake of supplements. Okay, number 6, certain homeopathic products are promoted as substitutes for conventional immunizations, but they haven't been shown to be protective. So we always follow the recommendations of CDC, the recommendations of, because our immunization schedule in the Philippines is basically patterned after the US. So we always follow the protocols as recommended here in the Philippines by PITSP, by PPS, and DOH. Okay, safety information for some common supplements. St. John's wort may interact, this is a rather popular product in the US, and may interact with other medications used for birth control, for seizures, and cancer treatments. Melatonin, a hormone which is used as a sleep aid, appears safe for short-term use, but no knowledge is available about its long-term use. Okay, so we have to be wary of that. Right now, melatonin is being studied as a good or adjunct to the treatment of COVID also. But the conclusive evidence still is awaiting publication, and we still do not have conclusive data regarding its use. We have to remember that melatonin is a hormone. It's being produced by the pineal gland. So it may affect, if you're getting too much of it, it may affect the function of your pineal gland because it may create a negative feedback mechanism. Okay, but we will have to wait for further information and knowledge on melatonin as an adjunct in the treatment of COVID-19. Giving probiotics to children doesn't appear to be risky, but conclusive evidence is lacking, particularly for long-term use. Critically ill patients shouldn't use probiotics. So probiotic use is largely strain-specific, okay? Not all probiotics are created equal. If you look at the data, the literature, there are very good probiotics for specific indications. Okay, so we have to be very, very selective. We have to be, look into the efficacy of certain probiotics in terms of its intended use and its marketed use for children. Omega-3 supplements may cause minor stomach problems such as belching, indigestion, or diarrhea. Okay, so safety information number 7 for some common supplements. The AAP doesn't recommend multivitamins for healthy children and teens who eat a varied diet. It's best if they can get their vitamins from food. We couldn't agree more. We have to get our macro and micronutrients from food, okay? But that is not always the case. So that's why there is a need for supplementation. But we have to emphasize to our parents, to our patients, that they have to eat right. It's easier said than done. I may not be practicing what I preach because, as you know, I'm not the healthiest of eaters out there. So, but that is the reality. We have to rely on diet to provide adequate macro and micronutrient supply. Number 8, hidden ingredients are increasingly becoming a problem in products promoted for bodybuilding. So we hear of young individuals having renal and hepatic failure because of supplements, because of intake of whey protein, because of intake of supplements, bodybuilding supplements, dieting products, okay? So some bodybuilding products marketed as dietary supplements contain steroids or steroid-like substances, and this could lead to serious liver injury, stroke, kidney failure, or other serious conditions. Similarly, dietary supplements marketed for rapid weight loss may not be at all helpful and may have harmful effects. So some supplements have a lot of caffeine or herbs such as guarana that contain caffeine, which can cause life-threatening changes in heart rhythm. And the FDA has also found weight loss products tainted with potentially dangerous prescription drugs. Okay. And number 10, parents and teenagers need to ask their healthcare providers or pediatricians about the effectiveness and possible risks of any complementary health approaches being used or considered. So these are just some things to know about supplements to children and teens. Okay, next we focus on fluoride. I am discussing this because dental caries is said as the most common chronic disorder in children. Okay, a lot of children have dental caries, and this will impact nutritional intake of children because if they have, really bad teeth with dental caries, they may not have adequate, or it may affect intake of food. And in the Philippines, in the 2006 National Oral Health Survey, they found out, this is data from the Department of Health, that 97.1% of children aged 6 years old suffer from tooth decay. That is almost all of children in the Philippines at that age have tooth decay. And more than 4 out of 5, that's more than 80% of children, manifested symptoms in this particular age group of dentinogenic infection. Now, for older children at 12 years of age, 78.4, that's still a very significant proportion of children in this particular age group have dental caries, and half of them manifested symptoms of dentinogenic infections. So Filipinos bear the burden of gum diseases early in their childhood. According to this particular body, the National Oral Health Survey, 74% of 12-year-old children suffer from gingivitis. And if this is not treated early, these children become susceptible to irreversible periodontal disease as they enter adolescence and approach adulthood. So this would still impact their nutritional state and the state of their being healthy. Okay, so let's take a look on fluoride, the recommendations, because primarily fluoride is our source, at least in the Philippines, is coming from our toothpastes. In the Philippines, we do not fluoridate our water. The US does. In the UK, in European countries, they do not fluoridate their water, but they provide fluoride salts, much like in the way that salt is being iodized. Okay, so the AAP recommends the following. Over-the-counter fluoride rinse is not recommended for children younger than 6 years of age due to risk of swallowing higher than recommended levels of fluoride. We also have to look into the possibility of fluorosis because lack of fluoride is not good for the teeth. Too much of it is also not good. Okay, so the AAP recommends provision of systemic supplementation for all children ages 6 months to 16 years living in communities with suboptimally fluoridated water after careful consideration of other fluoride exposures. Okay, so this was published in the journal Pediatrics in August of 2014. As I said, in the Philippines, we do not fluoridate our water, but there are certain communities in the Philippines with natural fluoride in the water. As mentioned, the most prominent would be in Cavite, in Kawit, Noveleta, Cavite City. Okay, so the incidence actually of fluorosis in that particular community is rather high. That means they're getting more than the required fluoride. I have come across some data or just a particular article that mentioned Bukidnon having naturally fluoridated water, but I cannot validate that from other literature. So maybe folks coming from Bukidnon, you can ask your DENR regarding the validity of that information. Okay. So in areas where there is no adequate fluoridation, we have to supplement fluoride. Okay. Now fluoride acts on the teeth through topical contact. So if a child, like before we had fluoride supplementation in the form of vitamins, before I usually give it starting at 6 months, even if the child doesn't have teeth yet, which is not actually right because You only give fluoride when there is already the eruption of tooth. Okay, because the effect of fluoride is topical. It can only act on if you apply it on the teeth. Okay, so following the AAP recommendations, fluoridated toothpaste is recommended for all children starting at tooth eruption. First eruption, dapat their teeth should be exposed to fluoride, regardless of caries risk. So a smear. So in the Philippines, how do we do that? Because our water is not fluoridated. Okay, the size of a grain of rice, isang butil ng bigas of toothpaste should be used up to age 3. You apply that on the teeth after first eruption twice a day. That should provide enough fluoride for good and strong development of teeth. After the third birthday, a pea-sized amount may be used. Okay, so from 6 months to 3 years, once the teeth has erupted, a grain size of toothpaste, regular toothpaste containing fluoride, may be applied on the teeth of children. After that, after the third birthday, pea-sized. Parents should dispense toothpaste for young children to avoid over excessive giving of toothpaste, which may lead to fluorosis, and supervise and assist with brushing. Fluoride varnish, as what our pediatric dentists are doing for relatively well-healed patients who can afford it, is recommended in the primary care setting every 3 to 6 months, starting at tooth emergence. So our pediatric dentists actually do it. They just paint or do fluoride varnish on erupted teeth. Okay, so this was published Pediatrics 2014. Okay, so this is the recommendation taken. I haven't cited it here, but this is actually data from the Philippine Pediatric Dental Association of Pediatric Dentists in the Philippines. And they have the recommendation here: from birth up to 6 months, still don't have to give. From 6 months to 3 years, that's 0.25. So a pea-size toothpaste would provide around 0.5 milligram of fluoride. Okay, so as we've said, from 6 months to 3 years, it's just a grain of rice, the size of a grain of rice, which the toothpaste that's given to that child should provide half of the pea size. So that's roughly 0.25 milligram rather. From 3 to 6 years, which we said is going to be pea size, that's going to provide 0.5 milligram of fluoride. The column, the second column to your on your screen, that's the less than 0.3 ppm. This refers to the amount of fluoridation in the community. So this would be communities with no fluoridated water or no fluoride salts. So which is basically the reality in the Philippines. Okay, and finally, we are including deworming because parasitism is a real problem in the Philippines. It leads to anemia, it leads to malnutrition. Okay, so we also have to address, if we're going to talk about having our Filipino children grow up healthy. So WHO recommendations on deworming: preventive chemotherapy or deworming using annual or biannual single-dose albendazole, that's 400 milligrams, or mebendazole 500 milligrams, is recommended as a public health intervention for all. So this would be given for young children 12 to 23 months of age, but they clarified that this for those less than 2 years, only half of the dose should be given. So albendazole is given at 200 milligrams for those less than 2 years of age. Now, in the Philippines, we have this program, we call it the Garantisadong Pambata, which was started in 1999, I think. Primarily, it started just as deworming and vitamin E supplementation, but it expanded to several nutrient supplementations as well. It recommends the start of deworming at 2 years of age. Okay. It also, the WHO recommends also in preschool or among preschool children 1 to 4 years of age, and school age children 5 to 12 years of age. In some settings, it's up to 14 years of age. But I tell my patients, I give deworming medicine to children, then I tell the parents, I think you also have to deworm yourselves because you're like eating Japanese food, raw foods. It's not going to harm. So I also prescribe deworming medications for parents. So this recommendation is applicable or given for in settings when an area has the baseline prevalence of any soil-transmitted infection of more than 20% among children in order to reduce the worm burden of soil-transmitted helminth infection. Okay, so as they said, a footnote here is biannual administration is done when the baseline prevalence is more than 50%. Okay, but if it's less than 50%, annual deworming schedule for the population is usually done. Okay, so the deworming if the prevalence is 20% or more. Now let's take a look at the Philippine setting. What is the prevalence of soil-transmitted infestation or infection or parasitism? Now, this data was published in 2015. However, it does not specifically look into just children alone. This is actually general population. So the mean age for this particular study was 23 in Luzon, 25 years in Visayas, and 24 in Mindanao. Okay, but if you look at the prevalence of infestation or parasitism, for Ascaris, the level or the prevalence in Mindanao is 21%. So that's more than the 20% that the WHO recommend for routine deworming of children. Although this does not, conclusively say that this figure is for children, but we don't have that data. But it would be safe to say that significant number of these subjects are belong to the pediatric age group. Finally, we go to, since we're talking about nutritional supplementation, we go into appetite stimulants. Okay, so again, we always emphasize that we don't need appetite stimulants. A child just has to eat a balanced nutrition for him to get adequate macro and micronutrients. But in reality, a lot of children are not eating, are very picky. So in some settings, a lot of times rather, mothers would ask us for appetite stimulants. Doc, basin na ay para pampakanagkaon, sometimes they pambatulog. Then we are at a fix. Do we give appetite stimulants? Okay. Remember that before prescribing appetite stimulants, you also have to look into the other reasons that a child may not be eating. You have to look into whether in the presence of chronic conditions, a child may have primary complex or has parasitism or has anemia. You look into neurodevelopmental milestone. A child may have problems neurodevelopmentally, which may affect feeding. You look into the social environment, in the home environment. There may be other reasons, okay, not just the absence of appetite that may be stimulated by drugs. Okay, so there are a lot of reasons why a child may be eating. Before you look into those before you give or you recommend appetite stimulants, if at all, because we're now going to take a look at the science behind these appetite stimulants. So the ones commonly used are buclizine, pizotifen, lysine, and B12 or dibencoside. Okay, first one, buclizine. This is the rather most common appetite stimulant in the market. It comes in different brands. Okay, so buclizine is a histamine receptor antagonist from piperazine derivative family, which has anti-emetic and anti-vertigo activities primarily. So this drug was manufactured. This was started in Belgium in I don't know, 80s or 90s. So it's primarily marketed as anti-emetic and anti-vertigo drugs. It possesses anticholinergic, antihistaminic, central nervous system, depressant, and local anesthetic effects. And adverse reactions would include drowsiness, dizziness, incoordination, blurred vision, urinary retention, vomiting, rash, dry mouth, headache, nausea, epigastric pain, weight gain, and diarrhea. Weight gain because of appetite stimulation. So the appetite stimulation afforded by this particular drug is because is an adverse effect. It's not the primary effect. So that means when you give this drug, you also run the risk of creating other responses in a child's body, okay, or other reactions in a child's body because it has a plethora of effects and adverse reactions. Okay, now So buclicin used for appetite stimulation in children in some countries has not been approved in the United States, in the UK, in Canada, and Australia for such indications, especially in countries with stricter regulatory bodies. Okay, the problem with buclicin is it does not have a safety profile for as appetite stimulation as an indication. If you look into the literature, go through researches, you would not find a study that would validate the safety of buclicin for children as an appetite stimulant. Now, I looked into the literature. I only found several information in one country alone that tackled buclicin. Okay, because as I've said, in most countries, developed countries, it's not being used as appetite stimulant. So in developing countries, in some developing countries, it is a rather popular ingredient of most appetite stimulant medications. So there's only one country that tackled this head first, and it's India. And in 2016, because it's been available in India for several years, and there had been complaints about it, so they tackled it, and they found out that there is no clinical trial or study or report on human beings to justify the use of buclicin as an appetite stimulant. And they actually asked this data from safety data from the manufacturers. However, the manufacturers could not provide such. So the committee recommended to prohibit marketing of buclicin as an appetite stimulant. Later, the Drugs Technical Advisory Board of India also considered the said matter and recommended prohibition and manufacture, sale, and distribution of these particular drugs for the indication as appetite stimulant. And the panel also noted that the drug is banned due to adverse drug reactions in countries with well-developed and efficient regulatory system, including USA, UK, EU, Australia, Japan, and Canada. Therefore, in exercise of the powers conferred by Section 26A of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act of India, and after examination of the recommendations, the central government has banned buclicin as an appetite stimulant. And in December 13, 2018, 2 years ago, it was totally banned as an appetite stimulant. Okay, and it has been said to be irrational for human use. But in the Philippines, it's continually marketed because we don't have regulatory bodies that monitor these kinds of products. Second is pizotifen. Is a potent, it's also an appetite stimulant in some products marketed for children in the Philippines. It's a potent serotonin and tryptamine antagonist that has been used for migraine prevention. So primarily it's for migraine. Again, the side effect is appetite stimulation. So the most commonly occurring side effects are drowsiness and an increased appetite, which may lead to an increase in body weight. The effect of appetite stimulation may be due to the drug acting at the metabolic level rather than a direct stimulation of the appetite center. So it has anti-serotonin, anti-tryptaminic properties, antihistaminic, and antagonistic activity against kinins. It has weak anticholinergic effects and sedative properties. So it has a lot of effects. The problem, again, with this particular ingredient in appetite stimulant preparations is the lack of safety profile. We do not have data on its safety for use in children. So I wouldn't recommend, again, the use of this particular appetite products containing this particular ingredient. So the next is lysine, which is rather very common among regular multivitamin preparations. Lysine, at least, is an essential amino acid. So it's a natural ingredient found in the protein of foods such as beans, cheese, yogurt. The ones derived from grains such as wheat and corn tend to be low in lysine content. So it's a naturally acting or an amino acid which is supposed to enhance appetite and can be found actually in foods, but it's also incorporated in a lot of multivitamin preparations. The claimed effect is increase in appetite leading to an increase in energy intake. No references were provided from which conclusions could be drawn for the scientific substantiation of the claimed effect. This was according to the European Food Safety Authority, published in their journal in 2011. So on the basis of the data presented, the European panel concludes that a cause and effect relationship has not been established between the consumption of lysine and an increase in appetite leading to an increase in energy intake. So it may not actually live up to its hype as an appetite stimulant. Lastly, we have vitamin B12, which is marketed as the bencoside. Okay, so obviously it's natural because it's a member of the B vitamins. So it's also called as adenosylcobalamin, which is responsible or helps in cell energy, brain development, hydration, growth, and muscle development. B12 plays a specific role, or dibencoxide plays a specific role in amino acid metabolism, specifically in methionine synthase. So in the synthesis of methionine, okay, it has a role. So what is the role of methionine in the body? Okay, so methionine is the building block for proteins. It has the ability to be converted into important sulfur-containing molecules for the functions of protection of tissues, modifying DNA, maintaining proper function of cells, and it plays a critical role in starting process of making new proteins inside cells, something that is continuously occurring as older proteins break down. So it basically has to do with protein metabolism for building up of protein, okay, which is actually the basis for growth. So the bencoside increases the protein efficiency coefficient, the percentage of bound nitrogen for protein buildup in the body. Okay, so the initial sign of effectiveness is manifested by a marked increase in appetite. So it obviously facilitates optimum utilization of dietary protein intake and contributes to the formation and repair of body tissues and stimulates appetite. Now, again, if you look into the literature as to the recommendation of the bencoside as appetite stimulant, most of the studies on this particular ingredient are found in the Philippines. We have studies on preterm neonates in older children, and the results of those studies are rather positive. Okay, but when we talk about a really large study that validates its usefulness and efficacy, we don't have that. Okay, so finally, we are down to the last few slides. So in summary, we have discussed the status of micronutrient state, or rather deficiency or lack thereof of micronutrients in Filipino children. We have discussed the recommendations to address such deficiencies, and we cannot overemphasize that for a child to be healthy, he has to eat a balanced diet. That means there is diverse dietary intake, there is enough meal frequency, okay? So it always has to be food, food, food. We emphasize pinggang Pinoy. But in a lot of cases, children are not eating enough. So that puts into the spotlight the need for supplementation. But primarily, we have to focus on balanced nutrition. But there is going to be room for supplementation. So dietary guidelines state that nutritional needs should be met primarily through the diet. But for some children, supplements may be a useful way to get nutrients they might otherwise lack. And in countries where nutrient-containing dietary supplements are common, such as in the Philippines, the use of multivitamin, multimineral preparations is often associated with a greater proportion of the population reaching the estimated average requirement, as what we said, the EAR. So a good percentage of the population is going to meet the EAR, the estimated average requirement, through supplementation in terms of meeting the requirements for certain nutrients. I also have here, before I end this lecture, a good source of information that we can access, and our parents of our patients also can access. This is a reading material from the United States Department of Agriculture. It's titled Infant Nutrition and Feeding. It really has a good content. And this was updated. This was the latest information. This was published 2019, just last year. Here's the link on your screen. If you want to take a look at that, that's a very good read. It's a long but very good read. So part of the contents are the following. So you can just look it up in the web. It's for free. And you can recommend this to your patients. Very easy reading as well. So with that, I have tackled a little of nutritional supplementation among children and adolescents for the past hour, over an hour. Sorry for the long talk. So I say thank you and happy birthday, Therese.
Thank you very much, Dr. Absin. That was a lengthy discussion.
I know. I lost track of the time. So I think there's no more time for questions. We have to eat our dinner.
There are actually comments and questions, so it's quite just a few. So there's somebody, an anonymous doctor. He said there is an app that gives a guide on sunbathing. Could you comment on this, please? Will this be enough as substitute for oral vitamin D supplementation?
The app? I'm sorry?
Yes. There is an app that gives a guide on sunbathing,
Yeah.
but he didn't mention what app. Could you comment on this, please? Will this be enough as substitute for oral vitamin D supplementation?
Yeah, I think so. If you're getting enough sunlight exposure, then you should be getting enough vitamin D3. And that should provide that is why it's not much of a problem in the Philippines, but it is going to be a problem because Filipinos are getting less and less sun exposure nowadays. I'm not familiar with that, so I'm not sure how to answer that.
Okay. There's a comment here from an expert on nutrition. This is Dr. John Paul Oliveros. He said, excellent lecture, Dr. Absin. FNRI 2013 shows vitamin D insufficiency and deficiency is high in adults 20 years old and more, reaching 60% in 20 to 39-year-old. That is from those from NCR. This is probably due to the pollution, living and working indoors, and the trend in skin whitening products. Okay. I hate vitamin D because you have to go out midday just to get it.
Thank you, Jao, for that. So we have information data on vitamin D deficiency, but not really in children. Yeah, because
So-
adults are going inside offices early in the morning and going out late at night, so they don't have actually sun exposure.
He also added, not much studies in children, but I had pedia endocrinology co-fellow who did this study on vitamin D levels among school children in NCR. Her study showed around 20 to 30% prevalence of deficiency. We Filipinos can actually be vitamin D deficient.
Yeah, the problem in the Philippines is we do not have supplements. I think we are starting to get preparations. Like in the US, infants are given vitamin D supplementation. We don't have that in the Philippines. But there is, I think, vitamin D available in healthy options.
Okay. But we do have so much sun.
I'm sorry?
Okay. We do have so much sun.
Right. But we do not value the sun.
Libre lang. Okay. There's a question here from our infectious diseases specialist, from Dr. Robert Tagocon. He's asking, light emitting diodes or LED lights also emit UVB. Do you have any idea as to the estimated duration to get the possible recommended requirement of vitamin D3 by using these lights as source?
Yes. Hi, Robert. Actually, I don't have any. I'm not familiar with the use of how do you call that? Diode.
LED lights.
Yeah. So I
Light
don't have.
emitting diodes.
Yeah. So I don't have any idea whether that can be useful. But theoretically, it's UVB, which helps, but you have to consider the distance from the skin, the level of rays that reaches the skin. We don't have measurements for that, or at least I don't know the measurements for those. So I don't have any idea. I'm sorry. Yeah, I haven't read on that, but I'll take a look at it. Thank you for bringing that up.
Okay. The next question is from Dr. Sharon Donaire. What is the dose of omega-3 in children?
Okay, for omega-3 in children, thank you, baby. Uh, my classmate, she texted me here the dose. So for omega-3, because it's not actually, I didn't get a information on that. So here's the text of our president. Notably, ALA is the only omega-3 fatty acid with specific dosage guidelines. The recommended daily intakes for ALA in children are 0 to 12 months, it's 0.5 gram, 1 to 3 years of age, 0.7 gram, 4 to 8 years, 0.9 gram, girls from 9 to 13 years, 1 gram, boys 9 to 13, 1.2 grams, 14 to 18 years for girls, it's 1.1 grams, and for boys, for that age group, it's 1.6 grams. Thank you, baby, for that information.
Okay. I hope that answers your question, Dr. Donaire. So here's another comment from Dr. Oliveros. I think another cause for the high incidence of dental caries in the preschool and school-age children is the practice of bottle feeding children to sleep. They don't get to brush their teeth, and their teeth is exposed to milk sugar for an extended time.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Because there is a
Yeah.
direct association with dental caries and excessive carbohydrate intake. So for that particular matter, that should explain the dental caries. Especially also right now that a lot of children are taking in sweetened beverages, very unhealthy kinds of food. So that also is contributory to the development of caries, dental caries.
Okay. So another question from Dr. Tagokon. Would it be dangerous? Wait.
The question is, even
Sorry.
partially,
Would it be
where
dangerous to children give commercially prepared multivitamins and multiminerals preparations where some of the contents might not be actually needed by the child?
okay, that's right. Because you give a particular multivitamin preparation in the hope that it would address a particular deficiency state. In the process, you're giving also other multivitamins. You have to consider that there are 4 lipid-soluble vitamins. That's vitamin A, D, E, and K. Okay, so in excess, when we talk about lipid-soluble vitamins, excessive intake of these would lead to toxicity, would lead to accumulation and toxicity. But the levels of the levels of or the content of a particular vitamin in a particular preparation are usually not that high. In vitamin preparations, you also have in the label, you check on that. It has information on the level, the RENI, or the recommended requirement for a particular nutrient stated there. So if it's still within the recommended, it wouldn't be harmful. And most of the vitamins are water soluble, so even if you give too much of it, it's not going to be a problem.
Okay.
I think
People like vitamin D. So there's another question here from Dr. Teresa Lopez. What is the allowable intensity of sunlight that cannot cause skin cancer?
yeah, so that is the problem with too much exposure, because you might be risking development of skin cancer. Skin cancer is also facilitated or caused by UVB. Okay, so that is why the recommendation is uh, once your skin starts to burn for a particular time, then you half that, you cut that into half, that time frame, and that should be a safe time for you to be exposed to sunlight. Okay, there are reports, there had been journals, I took it out from my slides, but different areas would have different intensities of UVB. Okay, so like in temperate countries, there's going to be, they need to be exposed more to sunlight for get an adequate supply of vitamin D. In the Philippines, as we've said, that's near the equator, it's just easier for us to get vitamin D unless it's very polluted. Okay, so that's a rough way of ensuring that you get a safe level of vitamin D from sunlight. You record the length of time for you to burn, and you take half of that. That's going to be a safe time for sun exposure.
Mm. In relation to that, there's a question here by Dr. Dexter Guangco. Can we just avoid the sun and take vitamin D supplements, which are readily available in the market? I take Fern D, vitamin D supplementation, that's 2,000 international units, because I hate the sun. Is this okay?
Yeah, that's why in countries where there is, like in Scandinavia, where during the winter season, they only have roughly 2 to 3 hours of sunlight, and most of the remaining hours of the day it's dark, so they don't get enough sunlight. And when the sun shines, actually it's very cloudy as well. So then they give supplementation of vitamin D. So oral supplementation of vitamin when the supply of sunlight, vitamin D that it gets from sunlight is not adequate, would be okay. So that is a recommendation for countries which do not get adequate sunlight. You have to supplement vitamin D.
Dr. Oliveros just added to the previous topic. I don't think there's going to be any problem if you follow the recommended dose for a multivitamin preparation. So this is talking about the doses of multivitamins. And then lastly, there's a question here again by Dr. Donaire. Please comment on not giving iron supplement when there is an active infection.
Yeah, actually, I cannot find data on that. Can we ask our infectious disease specialist, Robert? Can you enlighten? Because honestly, I don't know the answer to this. Because it's been a practice that we withhold iron, but as to its scientific basis, I don't know really. Robert, are you there? Wala.
Oh, I also know that Dr. Fernando Go doesn't recommend giving
Yeah, is he here?
iron supplementation during an active infection.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's not useful at that time. Doesn't add any benefit at all. So,
How
okay,
about like
so
you still eat foods with iron during an infection?
there's another question here. I'm sorry. Nganong maayo man mukaon ang bata kung naa sa laing balay?
So most likely the problem here is not about it can be a lot of reasons. It can be because the food in the other house is better tasting, or a child wants a change of environment, or there are behavioral issues in the child which may explain that. So it's a variety of reasons also. Like they would eat more in restaurants rather than at home, but the taste of food is basically the same. So it's just of more of a there's nothing organic about it. It's more of behavioral and social reasons.
Okay. A lot of people in the audience are actually asking what would be the answers to the questions later on.
The answer to the question, the questions are very easy. I mean, close it. You can close your eyes and answer it correctly. But the clue is the hint to the question. The answers. I said this to Therese that in our lives we just have to be true to ourselves, true to God, to our loved ones, true to our society, true to our community. So we always have to be true, and true all the time. That's the clue.
Okay. So you got that, Doctors Notario and Doctors Malu Vega?
Excuse me, can I interrupt? Somebody texted me.
Sure.
What was
Go
the
ahead, Dr.
question?
Tagokon.
Somebody questioned me. I'm making my rounds kasi. Sorry.
There was a question, Dr. Tagokon, that you cannot give iron supplementation when a patient has an active infection.
Yes, it's really a no-no to give iron supplementation because likewise, for giving iron to a healthy child, it will promote growth. So if a child is an active infection, it will likewise promote microbial growth. Okay, so that's one reason. Another reason there is that iron supplementation during acute infection, or there is an acute infection, it will interfere with the functions or the phagocytic functions of these neutrophils and other tawag dito, other cells that are found in the blood that combats infection. So those are the two main reasons there.
Thank you, Robert.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Tagokon. So I suppose we'll end the discussion. It's already like 1 hour and a half. So at this point, let me call on our birthday celebrant to award their certificate to the boy standing in front of her. Okay. So may I call on Dr. Maria Therese Habay, our Vice President, to award the certificate to our speaker, Dr. Dennis James Absin.
The Philippine Pediatric Society would like to present this certificate of appreciation to Dr. Dennis James E. Absin for sharing his invaluable knowledge and expertise as speaker in the continuing professional development course entitled Nutritional Supplementation in Children and Adolescents, given this 14th day of October in Cagayan de Oro City. Signed, Milita Maria A. Hamoy, PPS-NCM President, Cindy Canseco-Liego, PPS-NCM Secretary, and yours truly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Happy birthday.
Thank you again. The Philippine Pediatric Society North Central Mindanao Chapter also presents this certificate of appreciation to Maria Regina G. Mercado for sharing her invaluable time and skill as moderator in the continuing professional development course entitled Nutritional Supplementation in Children and Adolescents, given this 14th day of October in Cagayan de Oro City. Signed, Dr. Amelita Hamoy, Dr. Cindy Liego, and yours truly. Thank you so much, Reg.
Thank you, birthday celebrant. So maybe you can proceed to close or officially close tonight's activity.
Okay, good evening, everyone. We have just concluded our 7th webinar for this year. Again, I thank you for your kind attendance. My appreciation and gratitude goes to two of my good friends who have graced us with their presence tonight. Our esteemed speaker, because he doesn't want to be called CDO's finest, Dr. Dennis James Absin, for that very extensive and significant lecture on nutritional supplements, and to Dr. Maria Regina Mercado for accepting my plea to act as MC and moderator. Thank you so much. Thank you also to Natra Farm. I would like to make mention the people behind this IT platform, PJ, Ma'am Hannah, Cherry, and Amy, for their hard work and ending support in every webinar. For announcement, the webinar scheduled for October 28 is indefinitely postponed due to unforeseen circumstances. For further announcement and updates, I encourage you to regularly check on our FB page. Before I say goodbye, I would like to thank everyone who has, in one way or another, made my birthday extremely special. It's a virtual birthday. It's a different one from the previous years, but nevertheless, I am thankful and it is an honor to celebrate life with all of you. Please always take the necessary precautions as always for your safety so that we may continue to serve the welfare of the Filipino child. God bless us all and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, birthday celebrant. Happy birthday. Enjoy the evening. And then to all our audience, please check the link on your, is it chat box for the link for the quiz, or at our PPS-NCM Facebook page. Always remember to be true to yourself. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Salamat sa inyo. Thank you, thank you.